The UPS man just dropped off this box. And in this box is our RV7 Rudder kit. What's exciting about the Rudder kit is, if you can put this together, the rest of the plane is just as straightforward. So let's get started by taking inventory. Before we actually get started on our rudder kit, we should review and demonstrate some of the fundamental, basic building techniques that are required, not just for the rudder, but for the many other components of the RV aircraft. When you feel comfortable with understanding these techniques, and then spend a little time practicing, you can confidently begin the construction of your own rudder. Watching a video demonstration is not a replacement for practice and expert guidance, but it will certainly show you what types of skills are needed to make it all happen. Our goal is to help you decide whether building a Vans aircraft is something you want to get involved with. So let's get started by talking about the metal sheets that are used for building our plane. One of the very popular materials used for the skins of RV components is an aluminum alloy called 2024 T3 Alclad. It is generally shiny in appearance as it has a very thin coating of pure aluminum, which is designed to fight corrosion. The sheets come in various standard thicknesses measured in thousandths of an inch. The thinnest typically is 16 thousandths. The next size up is 20 thousandths, which is the popular size for the aircraft surface skins. The most important thing for you to remember is to use the thickness that the aircraft designer recommends. Nothing thicker nor thinner. Another aluminum commonly used is called 6061 T6. This alloy is often found in extruded forms used for longerons and various angles. One of the first procedures we need to review is cutting our sheet aluminum. There are a number of styles of cutting shears that can be used. Here are two popular styles of tin snips. One style is commonly identified by their red and green handles. They are also known as a left and right aviation tin snips. This refers to the way the cut is made, and I will demonstrate how this works. Another popular shear looks like a big scissors, which is exactly what it is, and quite successful at making smooth, straight cuts on large sheets of aluminum. Your own practice and experience with these models will lead you to your favorite style. Let me demonstrate each of these. I'm going to mark a line on my aluminum. I use a Sharpie type marker on the aluminum. And that is going to be the line that I want to cut. I'm first going to demonstrate using my big scissors shears. And these do a very nice job of cutting, just like you were cutting cardboard. Like that. Zoom out. Great. And there we go. I've cut right up to the line. Now all I have to do is file this down. What's nice about these types is they don't leave much of teeth mark along the edge, so it makes our job of cleaning up the edge much easier. Now I'm going to demonstrate using the aviation snips. Now I'm using the red-handled one. Sometimes these are called the left-hand shears. What you need to know with these is that when you make a cut, one side is going to curl up and the other side is going to remain straight. So you want to curl up the side that you don't want to keep. So I'm going to trim off this edge because I want to keep the other edge. And I'm cutting almost up to the line so that I can come back and file and clean it up. Now with this cut I've drawn a line and I want to remove this thin piece of metal. I'm going to use my green aviation snip. It's also called a right-hand snip, and this part will curl. Now, this edge does have teeth marks because these type of aviation snips do leave teeth marks, so I will need to file this down and polish it up. These are also very useful for tight corners and small areas and thicker materials.
The edge that remains after you cut is sharp, jagged, and may have tiny serrations from the cutting snips. We cannot leave it this way, even if you don't mind getting cut if you rub your finger over it. The reason is that this rough edge poses a threat of developing tiny cracks from the stress concentrations that are left by the sharp edge. Tiny cracks from a rough edge might grow into larger cracks. Our goal is to smooth the edge so that we can eliminate any of these breeding grounds for cracks. There are a number of methods to accomplish this. None of them take very long, and deburring should become an automatic ritual that you perform after each cut. You can start by taking a file and simply removing the rough edge this way. A final quick polish can be obtained by using a little emery cloth. Or there is a tool like this one, a double-edged deburring tool, that, with a few drags across a sharp edge, will remove any burrs. Or a belt sander can take the rough edges off the aluminum pretty quick. It is also a good way to round off sharp corners when they are not desired. A more sophisticated way to clean up a rough edge is to use the popular Scotch-Brite cut and polish wheel to dress the edge. This is mounted on our drill press so that we can work with long edges. We generally want to run this wheel along the direction of the edge for the final polish, as opposed to the other way, which could introduce scratches back into the edge. This is the fastest and most professional way to get a polished edge. Whatever method you use, the goal is simply to obtain a smooth edge that has no teeth marks or jagged edges. It should be safe to run your finger over it. If you need to cut a notch in a sheet, do not be tempted to simply cut intersecting lines for a sharp corner. Sharp inside corners in sheet aluminum are prone to start a crack,
as there is a high stress riser at that corner. There are lots of vibrations in an aircraft, and we want to reduce the opportunities of cracking due to flex and fatigue wherever possible. The correct solution is to first drill a hole at the corner location. This serves the purpose of creating a radius at the corner. The stress risers are distributed around the radius instead of being concentrated at the corner. The cut can then be made to the hole and filed if needed to make for a smooth transition. There is usually plenty of drilling to be performed on sheet aluminum. Even in the case of pre-punched skins, the holes needed to be opened up to their final size with your drill. You will find that your drill bits last a long time when drilling aluminum compared to drilling steel. The size of the holes you will make is dictated by the designer of the aircraft and documented on your drawings. Eventually, a fastener such as a rivet or bolt will fill these holes. Many of the holes you drill for rivets will be one of these three sizes to match the rivet size. A 3/32 rivet requires a number 40 drill bit. A 1/8 rivet requires a hole made by a number 30 bit, and a 5/32 rivet uses a number 21 drill bit. These are numbered drill bits as opposed to the fractional drill bit sizes. These sizes are chosen as they are ever so slightly larger than the rivet or bolt that goes in their hole. You can use a battery-operated drill, or the better choice is an air drill, as they have a much higher RPM speed, which is advantageous with the small holes we need to put into aluminum. Also, they don't need recharging, they are lighter, and can get into tight locations that you will sometimes encounter. On the other hand, you do need a noisy compressor. It's quite easy to punch the drill too far through the material being worked on, with possible damage to the surface. We use drill stops that allow the bit to travel only so far through the material without damage to the surface. They are designed for a particular drill bit size. The set screw lets you adjust the depth of the bit. It is important to keep the drill perpendicular to the surface and to have a solid surface behind the material being drilled. A center punch can be used to aid in keeping the drill bit from wandering, or by starting the drill slowly or turning by hand, we can keep the drill from walking off of its intended location. It is good practice to drill a pilot hole that is smaller than the final size of the hole. This helps to accurately locate the exact position of the hole. We can then go back and open the hole to its final diameter with a second pass. Just as in the case of deburring the rough edges of newly cut sheets, we must also deburr both sides of our new hole. Close examination shows that there is often a ridge or burr that results from drilling. If we left this ridge on, it would interfere with a tight fit against an adjoining structure, and a sharp edge could spawn a crack. Deburring holes is easy and can be accomplished with either an oversized drill bit, or you can use a deburring tool like this, consisting of a deburring cutter bit mounted on a swivel handle that is designed to do this quickly and efficiently. A single turn will cut the ridge from the hole, and it needs to be done on both sides. Do not overdo it. More than one turn and we go from deburring to countersinking the hole, which is not good on thin aluminum sheet. Sheet metal fasteners, commonly known as clecos, are made to temporarily hold your metal parts together while you are drilling or riveting. They come in sizes to match the holes you are drilling and are color-coded for quick identification. The silver is for 3/32, the copper for 1/8, and the black for 5/32 size holes. They are spring-loaded and require a special cleco pliers that will operate on all of the sizes. You can't have enough of these things, and you will quickly understand their usefulness as you use them. Squeezing the pliers unlocks the stem of the cleco and allows you to insert them into the holes of your parts. Releasing the pliers locks the stem into the holes, squeezing the parts tightly together. With just a few clecos in place, you can keep your parts perfectly aligned with one another so you can accurately drill or rivet as required. We are now ready to talk about the wonderful world of rivets. Rivets are the fasteners that hold your plane together. They are smaller, lighter, and a lot less expensive than nuts and bolts. We must first learn to identify and understand the various kinds of rivets and how they are sized. In the foreground is a blind or pop rivet. Very few of these are used in the construction of your RV, so we will remove this and limit our discussion for now to the solid rivets, which there are several thousands of these to be installed in your kit. There are two general categories of solid rivets: countersunk or flush, and those are designated number 426, and universal head rivets, the ones with the domed head, and those are designated 470. The countersunk rivets are commonly used on exterior metal skins so they reduce the wind drag, and they have a wonderful appearance as they sit flush with the surface. This flush design requires the metal surface on which they lie to be dimpled or countersunk. Universal head rivets, or the domed head rivets, protrude above the surface and can be used where drag reduction or appearance is not important. They have the benefit of not requiring dimpling or countersinking. Identifying rivets by their size and type is an important skill we need to learn. In this picture we have the flush rivets across the top and universal along the bottom. These three sizes of each style reflect the most common diameters you will use in an RV kit. These three diameters, of course, determine the size of the hole that needs to be drilled. The other important aspect of a rivet is its length. A rivet can have a wide range of possible lengths for each of these diameters. Here is a standard numbering system that helps us identify the dimensional aspects of these rivets. We need to be familiar with this numbering system so we can select the proper rivets to use as specified on the plans when building our plane. This chart summarizes the details for understanding the numbering system. The AN specifies that the rivet is of Army-Navy standards. The AN is being replaced nowadays by the letters MS for military standard. These letters are interchangeable with the AN, for example, when ordering rivets from a catalog. The 426 specifies that we need a flush style head on the rivet. The AD is a code that specifies the type of alloy the rivet is made of. AD rivets are specified to be used in your RV plans. The next number specifies the diameter of the rivet in 32nds of an inch. In this case, 4 32nds or 1/8 inch diameter. The last number specifies the length of the rivet in 16ths of an inch. In this example, 4/16 or 1/4. In addition to selecting a rivet that is proper diameter for the hole in which it will occupy, it's also quite important that the length of the rivet be just right. As the riveting process requires a certain length of tail to be exposed after passing through the material to be joined. The rule of thumb is that the tail length needs to be 1.5 times the diameter of the rivet. This precise length ensures that the riveting process will have just the right amount of material to form the shop head. Your RV plans will specify the proper length rivets for each part of the aircraft. However, you need an easy way to verify that you are using the correct rivet each time. A simple gauge is available that allows you to measure the rivet stem before riveting to ensure you grabbed the right rivet from your collection. This gauge has separate notches for 4 diameter sizes of rivets. You simply choose the notch that matches the diameter of the rivet in question to check if its stem has a length of 1.5 times the diameter. The closer to this ideal length, the better and easier it will be to form a proper shop head. This gauge is sometimes called a go-no-go gauge. Our goal is to squeeze the rivet, which will flatten one end, and this will be called the shop end, resulting in a strong permanent fastener. When the rivet is squeezed or set properly, 3 things occur. Number 1, the tail is turned into a shop head as it expands. Number 2, the rivet shank expands to tightly fill up the holes. And number 3, the rivet itself becomes work hardened, which means the rivet material actually becomes harder. We have control as to how much the rivet can be squeezed, which results in how big the shop head becomes. The more squeezed, the larger its diameter. To gauge how much squeeze is just right, we need a simple method to measure the shop head diameter. A properly squeezed rivet shop head should be a minimum of 1.5 times the diameter of the rivet. Another check is that the height of the shop head should be a minimum of 1/2 the diameter in height. A simple gauge is available that has these dimensions already calculated. A quick pass over the shop head demonstrates if we have met these standards. If the hole in the gauge is a tight fit on the shop head or cannot fit at all, then the diameter of the shop head has met the minimum 1.5 times the diameter of the rivet. There is a separate gauge for each diameter rivet size. The other end of the gauge ensures that the rivet wasn't squeezed too much. If the horseshoe slot won't fit over the shop end, then the minimum 1/2 times the diameter of the rivet has been met. Nearly all of the rivets we are going to use with our RV kit are of the flush style and need to be countersunk. In order for a rivet to sit flush into the skin, we need to countersink our holes. There are 2 ways to create the countersink. Dimpling presses a divot into the thin metal under the rivet head. Countersinking cuts away the metal from under the rivet head so that its top is flush with the skin surface. Countersinking is used on thicker metal material. Both dimpling and countersinking accomplish the same objective. Let's look at the tools that we're going to use to create the dimples in our skin. These are called dimple dies. It's a match set. There is a male and female piece. The male has a pilot on its face that fits into the female piece. It is the diameter of this pilot that determines the size of the dimple dies. We are primarily interested in 2 sizes, a set of dies for 3/32 and one for the 1/8 inch, matching our typical rivet holes. On the other side of the dies is a shaft that fits into a choice of tools that will operate the dies. The operation of the dies is quite simple. They will be pressed together with the metal in between, which will result in a depression being permanently impressed into the metal. The tools that hold the dies and press them together are going to include two popular choices: a hand squeezer, and there's a pneumatic version of this too, or a C-frame tool. Let's look at using the hand squeezer. The male and female dies are loaded into each side of the yoke, and then they are adjusted so that they contact each other when the handle is squeezed. You then insert the male pilot into the hole and give a firm squeeze, compressing the dies into the metal. It is quite important to orient the dies correctly so that the depression is made on the correct side of your metal. One limitation of the hand squeezer is that it has a limited reach from the edge of the metal. There are larger yokes, but they still cannot always reach holes far from the edge. For these situations, we have the C-frame tool. It will use the exact same set of dies as our hand squeezer. We will put the male die on the bottom and the female will go on top. This is a sliding spring-loaded shaft so that it will automatically pull away from the metal when the operation is complete. The long arm gives us the ability to reach holes in the middle of our skins. With the male die on the bottom, we can easily slide our metal with the holes onto the pilot shaft of the male die until the hole pops on. We whack the shaft with a good blow to create the impression. We can then quickly move the metal to the next hole and repeat until we are through. Having a second set of hands is a great help. To create a countersink for our rivets in thicker materials, such as 63 thousandths and thicker, we cannot dimple, but rather machine countersink. This process actually removes metal with the cutter to make room for the rivet, as opposed to dimpling where the metal is simply deformed. Here's what our countersinking tool looks like. It is driven by our drill. Notice at the tip of the cutter is a pilot which we will insert into the rivet hole to be countersunk. We need to have a different cutter so that the pilot matches each of the popular size rivet holes we drill. The cutter will spin and cut the metal at a 100-degree angle which coincides with the angle of the rivet heads. The cage provides an adjustment to make sure we don't cut too far or too little into the metal by limiting the depth of the cutter. Twisting the adjustment in one direction allows the cutter to protrude a little bit farther, the other direction a little bit less. Let's demonstrate how this works. We first drill and deburr the hole. Assuming we have properly adjusted our cutter, all we need to do is spin the drill and press all the way down. It is very easy to cut too little or too far into the metal, which will adversely affect the fit of the rivet. Cutting too little will not allow the rivet to seat flush. Cutting too far provides for a sloppy fit. Experimentation is essential in getting just the right cutter depth. There are two popular methods to accomplish the compressing of the rivet using modern tools. We can use a hand squeezer, the same one we used for dimpling, or we can use a rivet gun and bucking bar. Let's examine the hand squeezer first. If the rivet to be set is not too far from the edge of your material, the hand squeezer is an ideal tool for squeezing your rivets. A flush squeezer set or a cup squeezer set must be installed on each side of the yoke. If we are setting a universal head rivet, then we use the cup squeezer set in order to match the head of this style rivet. If we are setting a flush rivet, then the flush squeezer set is used with its two flat pieces. The sets are adjusted so that when the handles are closed, there is the proper amount of squeeze to compress the rivet just by the right amount. It is easy to under or over squeeze a rivet. This adjustment is made by trial and error. A hand squeezer would be an excellent tool for all of our riveting needs, except for the fact that its reach is limited by the depth of its yoke. The solution for this problem is to use a rivet gun and bucking bar. Instead of compressing our rivets by squeezing, we will impact the rivet with repeated hammering from our air-driven gun against an immovable object, the bucking bar. With just the right amount of repeated blows to the rivet for the correct duration, our rivet tail will form a shop head of proper size with the same result we got from our hand squeezer. It takes practice to control and deliver the right amount and intensity of hammering so that we do not over-compress the rivet. Rivet guns are air hammers, and the models used for our RV kit are rated as 2X or 3X, which specifies the relative strength and speed of the repeated blows they deliver. A 3X gun delivers harder blows more slowly than the 2X's shorter, faster blows. This choice is of personal preference, and both models are popular. The trigger is designed to tease the airflow, which gives you precise control over the strength and duration of the impacts you deliver to each rivet. The rivet gun uses a removable rivet set, which consists of a shaft that inserts into the gun on one end and a polished area that meets the head of the rivet at the other end. There are cupped sets for universal head rivets and flush sets for flush rivets. Each of the cup sets is designed for a particular rivet size. The trigger on the gun allows you to gradually increase the force and repetition of the impact blows that are transferred through the rivet set to the head of the rivet. A spring on the end of the gun holds the rivet set in place, allowing you to change the set to another size as needed. To absorb the impact, a bucking bar is held tightly against the stem or shop end of the rivet. This bar is simply a piece of steel weighing a few pounds with a polished face. They come in many sizes and shapes to facilitate getting into tight areas you will encounter when building your kit. The rivet set is chosen based on the type of rivet used, either a flush or universal head. The gun is squarely engaged with the rivet head, the bucking bar firmly held in place and square against the shop end. The trigger is squeezed for a few moments. The shop head is checked for adequate deformation with the rivet gauge. The amount of time pulling the trigger depends on the air pressure you are using and strength of the gun, 2X, 3X. This is where practice pays off. While these demonstrations show how a rivet is set, what is not obvious is that oftentimes the rivet is situated in such a location you cannot reach the bucking bar and the rivet gun at the same time. Your arms will not be long enough. This requires a second person to help you hold the bucking bar while you operate the gun. This coordinated effort between two people to rivet takes practice. When riveting thin aluminum skin, there is a tendency to get indentation marks on the skin from the force of the riveting action. There is a great technique called back riveting that helps alleviate this problem. Also, it generally makes the riveting process easier and more precise. We will demonstrate back riveting with this angle and sheet as an example. Our goal is to attach the angle to the sheet using flush rivets. We first dimple both the sheet and the angle in the usual way. Then turn the sheet over and place the rivets into the holes in the sheet. We then obtain some riveting tape. This one is made by 3M. It is special as the center section of the tape has no adhesive. Only the edges will stick. We are going to roll a strip over our rivet heads. This will hold the rivets tightly in place as we are going to turn the metal skin over and don't want the rivets to fall out. The sheet will be placed on our heavy metal bucking plate. This is going to be our bucking bar in this back riveting process. Its face is a polished surface so as not to scratch the rivet heads or sheet. We have loaded our rivet gun with a special back riveting rivet set. This contraption is similar to a flush rivet set with the added spring-loaded collar around the edge. You will see shortly that the purpose of this collar is to hold the sheet down tight when riveting. The process of riveting is quite straightforward. The difference here is that we are using our rivet gun on the stem of the rivet, and the rivet head is against the bucking plate. This is why we call it back riveting. The rivet is still being squashed, but we are doing it in the opposite direction. The advantage is that the heavy metal bucking plate is keeping everything very flat and uniform. We will find a near perfect surface when we examine the top side, which is exactly what we want. No chance of marring this top surface as would be possible if we riveted in the conventional way. You will find this technique quite useful in many areas of your RV building process, including the rudder. Sometimes it is desirable to remove a rivet after it has been installed. Maybe it didn't set correctly, or maybe you made a mistake and used the wrong type. In any event, it is common to need to remove them from time to time. A method to accomplish this is to first locate the exact center of the head where we want to place our drill bit. There is a tiny dot located on all AD type rivets that will aid us in this process. We want to use a drill bit of the same size used for the original hole and carefully find the exact center by slowly spinning the bit by hand or using short bursts. We should drill only to the depth of the head, not all the way through the hole. Then, using a punch, break the head off of the rivet. Now we can use the punch to punch the stem out. Our goal is not to damage the hole in the thin skin. This is easy to do if we are not careful. Also, supporting the skin underneath while punching the stem through can be challenging when the skin is installed on the aircraft. And finally, the pop rivet gun. It is unique in that it can set pop rivets, or more accurately known, blind rivets, because these rivets can be set with access to only one side of the hole. Blind rivets come in many different sizes, diameters, materials, so the proper one must be chosen for the application. The stem is inserted into the gun and the rivet into the piece to be riveted. The gun pulls on the stem, which compresses the rivet until the stem breaks off beneath the surface and the rivet is set. One of the first steps is to lay out the large skins for the rudder. There is a left and a right, an inside and an outside, and it's important to mark these with your Sharpie markers so that things don't get confusing later on in the construction. We have removed the vinyl blue protective covering from these large skins, so we should try and be careful not to scratch them unnecessarily. Become familiar with your blueprints. All of the pertinent information is located on these plans, and the more you become familiar with them, the easier it is to proceed. Also, there is a step-by-step assembly manual that comes with, and there are some check boxes so that you can mark off your progress as you proceed. We will use these directions in the assembly of our rudder. Some builders opt to not remove the complete vinyl protective coating from the skins in order to avoid unnecessary scratching of the surface. So one alternative is to selectively remove the vinyl. In other words, remove it just along the rivet line holes where we need to remove it for drilling, dimpling, and deburring. One way to do this is to use a soldering iron where we have blunted the tip so it doesn't scratch the surface, and slowly drag it along the vinyl where we want it removed. Then we can peel away those portions and leave the vinyl on the major surface area until the very end, when we can then remove it. This takes more time, but it will allow a nicer finish, especially if you're not going to be painting. Our construction begins by preparing the 8 stiffeners, which are pre-punched and matched to fit onto our skins. Our first step is to cut these stiffeners in half, and it is clearly marked on the stiffener where the center line is. This will provide us with 16 stiffeners, all of the same size. Referring to our plans, each of the 16 stiffeners needs to have a section removed from them, an angle cut into each of the ends. We will carefully draw this It turns out it is very easy to mark these, as there is an indentation in each of the stiffeners that shows us where the mark is to be made. And then we carefully trim using our metal shears. In this example, I'm using the red handle shears, or the left shear, because the metal on the left side is the one that is curling away from the material that I'm cutting. If I had chosen the green shears and cut in a similar direction, I would be in big trouble, as it would not work very well. This leaves a straight but ragged edge, And so I simply need to take it up to my Scotch-Brite deburring wheel and let the wheel cut and polish this edge so that it is no longer sharp. Each of the stiffeners is labeled with an A, B, C, etc., matching the skin. Looking at your plans, you will see that each one needs to be a slightly different length, and those lengths are determined when we lay the stiffener upon the skin and find out where the end point needs to be. Laying the stiffeners upon the skin, the pre-punched holes in both the skin and the stiffeners will match up, so they simply need to be clecoed to the skin, and then the holes need to be opened up to their final size by simply drilling through the holes of both of them simultaneously. The process is repeated for all of the stiffeners. It is quite an easy and enjoyable job. What's nice is you can't accidentally drill an incorrect hole. After removing the stiffeners from the skins, it's important that every single hole be deburred using your deburring tool. This removes any ridges and burrs left by the drilling process. It doesn't take long, but is a very important step. The next step is then to dimple each of the holes in the stiffener. We are dimpling because we are going to end up using the flush rivets, which will set into the dimple and make a very nice flat surface after the rivet is installed. We must also debore every hole in our rudder skins for the same reason that we did it in the stiffeners. And we need to do both sides of the skin. Now the skin needs to be dimpled, and again the direction of the dimple is important. Make sure the skin is not flipped over in the wrong direction. It's easy to check by simply holding a rivet up to the outside of the skin and making sure that all the dimples go inward. The skin is of relatively thin gauge, so I don't smack the dimpler with as much force as I did with the stiffeners, which is made of a thicker material. What about priming? Many builders desire to prime the aluminum parts for the purpose of protecting against corrosion. The topic of corrosion protection will not be covered in this video. Why? There are as many opinions about corrosion protection as there are builders. Please investigate this topic for yourself using the resources found at the end of this video. If you choose to prime your aluminum parts, it would be done at this time in the building process, as we are now ready to start riveting. Now we're ready for riveting. I'm simply preloading the dimples in the skin with the appropriate rivets, just setting them into the little holes. I'm going to do this just for one stiffener at a time. After all of the rivets are loaded into the dimples, we take a piece of that special riveter's tape
and carefully center it along the row of the rivet heads and tape them all down tightly. We can then carefully turn over the rudder skin and place our bucking bar underneath the row so that their heads are flat upon the surface of the bucking bar. We can then place the stiffener on top of the rivet stems and it will fit very nicely. We are preparing for back riveting, and using our rivet gun with the special back rivet set, we can go and then rivet each of the shop heads of the rivet. It goes relatively quickly and does a nice job. After we have completed all of the riveting, we can lift up the skin and remove the riveter's tape to expose our nicely set flush rivets. Then we can fill the next line of rivet holes with rivets, apply our riveter's tape, turn the skin over, and continue back riveting the next row. And an occasional check with our rivet gauge confirms that we have made the shop end of the rivets large enough for a tight fit or maybe no fit at all through the little hole. We will continue this process for the rest of the stiffeners. A completed skin is a work of art. Now we're ready to begin on the rudder skeleton. It consists of a number of ribs, and I'm labeling these parts so that they'll make them easier to match up with the plans, and a large spar running the height of the rudder. Using the plans, we can locate the position of these parts in relation to each other. The main rib attaches to the bottom of the spar. All the parts have been pre-drilled, so it's a matter of getting things right side up and positioned on the right set of holes. And the plans indicate that we need to enlarge a hole in the rib to match the hole in the spar. So we will cleco the rib to the spar in the correct location and drill through the spar using that large size hole and into the rib so that we have a matching hole through both pieces. Our duty is to select the correct drill bit size and to drill straight and clean right through.
The step-by-step assembly manual provides us a way to make sure that we don't miss any steps. The next component on the agenda is to situate the rudder horn, which is made out of this extruded piece of aluminum, in its correct position at the bottom of the spar. And we're going to line up the large hole, and the instructions desire that we use a bolt of proper size to temporarily hold the rudder horn to the spar in its correct location, so that we may turn the assembly over and drill through the holes, opening them up to their proper size. This same horn now gets aligned to the rib, and as we cleco it together, we notice, and the instructions point this out, that there is an interference that needs to be corrected by sanding away one of the radiuses of the edge of the horn. Otherwise, the fit will be obstructed, and it's certainly a simple thing to do using a belt sander. And here's a picture with the gap removed because the radius edge allows the rib to fit over the edge of the horn very nicely now. The assembly manual calls for us to create a shim and label it part 917, and this shim will be placed against the rudder horn, and then the pre-drilled holes in the horn will be drilled through the shim. Certainly an easy task to do, and its location is documented on the plans. We can then assemble all of the components together, and using the pre-drilled holes, simply drill through everything to their final diameter size. The holes provided in the van's kit are slightly undersized, and we need to open them up precisely so that the rivets will occupy them properly. A reinforcement plate is provided, cut out to the proper size, and even the holes are pre-drilled. So it's simply a matter of orientating it correctly and setting it up against the spar. There aren't many things that could be easier than doing this. The rudder brace comes pre-bent and pre-drilled. However, there does need to be some trimming from both sides. It is easy to determine where the trimming should occur, and we'll draw a line to designate that. This is made of rather heavy material, so we'll end up cutting halfway from one direction and then changing our snips and cutting from the other direction. We'll actually make two cuts. The first cut will be most of the material off, and then we'll take a second cut to trim it directly to the line, and then to our Scotch-Brite wheel to clean up the edge. It looks quite a bit different after we remove the protective vinyl covering and have it all trimmed up. We use our plans to determine where to insert it, and everything lines up through the pre-drilled holes. Additional reinforcement plates are located halfway up the spar and near the top. We simply need to orientate them correctly and place them on the correct side of the spar. And before we do any drilling, we will remove the protective vinyl covering. The rudder tip comes pre-bent and pre-drilled. We do, however, need to check how flat it is. When ribs are bent, they often will bow because of the bending process, and it's up to us to confirm their flatness, and more than likely we'll need to adjust them by using a pair of fluting pliers. The fluting pliers pinch the flange of the rib, effectively shrinking its size, causing the rib to bend. If we don't keep it flat, the holes along the rib will not line up when we go to attach it to the skin. So it is imperative that we adjust this rib, and it's not difficult to do, to keep those holes precisely in a straight line. At the top of the spar, we can now attach the counterbalance rib using the pre-drilled holes, and likewise the tip rib. A heavy section of skin, called the counterbalance skin, which is pre-drilled, can now be clecoed to the counterbalance rib and spar. The pre-drilled holes match up perfectly between the skin and the flanges and the spar. We then can drill through the holes, opening them up to their required size. Now that the skeleton is complete, we can now fit the side skins to the skeleton, matching up the pre-drilled holes in the spar and the skin. We can reverse the assembly and then attach the other side skin to the other side. After clecoing the entire assembly together, we can now perform the important function of enlarging all of the holes to their proper size.
All of the holes are pre-drilled. We are simply opening them up to their final size to accept them for dimpling and then riveting. A metal strip called the bottom attach strip needs to be cut to length, and it will be placed under the flange of the lower rib and then drilled through the pre-drilled holes in the skin and flange of the bottom rib. This operation needs to be performed for both sides of the rudder. We then need to disassemble or remove the skins from the skeleton, because at this point we need to deburr all of the holes that we previously drilled in the skeleton. If you find it impossible to deburr the bottom inside flange of the spar because your deburring handle won't rotate, there's an easy solution that consists of an extended shaft for your deburring tool, and it allows the handle to easily clear the upper flange and allow you to deburr that lower flange effortlessly. We are ready for dimpling. We are going to first dimple the flanges of the main spar. We're going to use our squeezer. The squeezer has been loaded with our dimple dies made for the size holes that we drilled in the spar. We're going to make sure that our dimples dimple inward. If we use the squeezer with the dies mounted incorrectly, the dimples would protrude in the wrong direction. That would not be good. We simply move from hole to hole until each and every hole on the flange has been dimpled. Next, we move to the skin. We need to deburr each and every hole that we drilled in the skin on both sides. The skin is very thin, and again we just need a single turn. We now proceed to dimple our skins. We could use the hand squeezer to dimple, but it's quicker using the C-frame tool. They both use the same set of dimpling dies to accomplish this purpose. One problem we run into when trying to dimple our ribs is that the flanges become very narrow near the end. Our normal squeezer yoke simply will not fit. We have a solution. A set of dimpling dies has been mounted to this vice grip pliers. This is a special tool which allows us to get into very tight, narrow locations and still provide a nice dimple. We are now ready for riveting. We're first going to rivet using our hand squeezers, and we're going to go after the universal rivets, the ones with the dome heads, on the main spar. Notice that the rivet set contains one cupped and one flat side
to match the rivet. We need to check our work periodically to make sure we're squeezing just the right amount. If we haven't squeezed enough, we can go back and add a little more squeeze to it. The goal is to have a very tight fit, or possibly not even fit the hole over the shop end of the rivet. That means we have squeezed it far enough. Our construction guide requests that we first rivet the reinforcement plates on the spar first. This is where the majority of universal head rivets are used. There will be locations where the hand squeezer will not be able to fit to set rivets. One example is at the area of the rudder horn. Due to the flange and the location of this rivet we need to set, there is no way the yoke of the squeezer can get a straight contact with the rivet in order to set it properly. This is where we're going to use our rivet gun and bucking bar. The bucking bar will be placed behind the rivet, and the rivet gun will be set on the universal head using a proper rivet set for this purpose. Generally speaking, we will use the rivet gun and bucking bar anywhere we can't get a reach from our hand squeezer. On the rudder, there aren't many occasions like this, but there are a few. And then there are locations where even a bucking bar can't fit. One example is the rudder brace. Due to its very tight area, we can't get a bucking bar sufficiently behind a rivet to buck. So what we use instead are pop rivets, or blind rivets is probably the more accurate term. They're called blind rivets because they can be set from one direction only. Using a pop rivet gun, we insert the stem into the gun and then simply insert the rivet into the hole, and by squeezing the handles, the rivet compresses, pulls the stem, and snaps the stem off. We are careful to use the type of blind rivet as called for in the plans, as there are several types, different sizes, different strengths. Here we have the counterbalance rib. Its purpose is to enclose or to hold the counterbalance weight, a piece of lead that fits inside the rib. One of the holes is already drilled. We will use the other hole in the weight as a pilot hole to drill the hole in the web of the rib itself. The weight eventually will be held in place by two machine screws. The rib also needs to be countersunk in order to accept the machine screw heads. The counterbalance skin is now prepared to be riveted to the counterbalance rib. We first cleco the two structures together. Since our hand squeezer cannot possibly reach the long width of the skin to set the rivets down at the bottom where the flange is located, we will have to use our rivet gun and bucking bar. The inside area is just right for our bucking bar, and we intend to place it inside and hold it with our fingers against the sharp end of the rivets. It is important to hold the bucking bar tight against the rivet while operating the rivet gun. Also, we keep clecos on either side of the rivet we're attempting to set to hold the skin tight to the rib flange. After finishing the riveting of the skin, it is now time to cleco the assembly to the very top of the rudder spar. We will then rivet this assembly to the spar. There will be just enough room to get our hand squeezer in there and set a couple of rivets securely. It is at this time we can now use screws and nuts to attach the counterweight onto the counterweight rib. We have now completed all of the riveting for the rudder skeleton. From this point forward, we will be installing skins and riveting them onto the ribs and the spar. We place our skin onto the assembly and cleco it securely in place. We turn the assembly over and attach the other skin to the other side with clecos. One challenging section to attack is where the counterweight skin and rib attach to the spar. That last row of rivets is just a little outside of the reach of our hand squeezer, so we will need to use a bucking bar and rivet gun to get those last 3 rivets. The bucking bar needs to be inserted inside the skin and supported with the fingers. The remainder of the rivets in this area can be attacked with the hand squeezer successfully. The tip rib is installed and clecoed in place. The vast majority of these rivets can be accomplished with the hand squeezer. However, at the narrower part of the rib, there just isn't enough room for the squeezer set to fit, especially since the stem of the rivet is protruding down and needs more space. So a special yoke, and if you will notice, this yoke doesn't have one of the squeezer sets installed. It's made to accept the shop end of the rivet directly and allow itself to squeeze into these narrow locations and set the rivet. And the very last rivet has to be a blind rivet, as there is no room to get the hand squeezer or bucking bar in there at all. The side skins can now be riveted to the main spar. The majority of these rivets will be put in place by the hand squeezer. The depth of the yoke you use in your hand squeezer has a lot to do with how far the reach can be made. In the case of the main spar, most of these rivets can be set successfully with the hand squeezer. The bottom attach strip is riveted in place using the hand squeezer. However, the section next to the rudder horn has no access to the back of the flange, and blind rivets are used in this small section. There is one small area at the bottom of the skin where it meets the spar that my hand squeezer simply won't reach. The yoke is not deep enough to get a good square set on the rivets. So in this case, we bring out the bucking bar and rivet gun. This area brings with it a new challenge. The very forward edge of the rudder has two flap overhangs forward of the main spar. These are going to be bent inward together in order to gain the curvature of each of these flaps. We need to use our secret weapon, a garden variety rake. We are going to attach it with duct tape. Notice we have laid a strip of duct tape the entire distance and placed it under one of the edges of these flanges. We will then lay the handle of the rake on the other half of the duct tape, the entire length of the rudder. Our goal: use the rake and rotate the handle and curve the flange inward. We will give it a good twist
and that will leave a nice curve to this flap. We will rotate the rudder around to the other side and perform the same operation on the opposite flap, folding it inward. This will leave us with two flaps that are bent nicely towards each other so that we can complete the curvature and rivet these two flaps onto each other. We will use duct tape to assist us in getting the pre-drilled holes to line up, which we will then cleco and then pop rivet to hold them in place. The trailing edge of the rudder consists of a wedge strip that runs the full length and comes between the two skins where they come together. This strip is pre-drilled with holes that match the rudder skins, and each hole must be countersunk in order to accept the flush rivet. It is a challenge to keep this trailing edge perfectly straight when riveting. So one of the solutions is to put a dab of glue, in this case we're using fuel tank sealant, in between each of the holes on the metal strip, and then use an extruded piece of L angle the entire length, clecoed to the trailing edge while the glue sets up. This will ensure that the trailing edge stays perfectly straight when we prepare it for riveting. After adequate time for the sealant to bond, flush rivets are set in the holes along the trailing edge, and then riveter's tape is placed along the complete length of the edge. The rudder is then turned over and carefully blocked so that it sits flat on the table, so that we can place our bucking bar riveting plate underneath the taped heads, as we will approach the rivet stems with our back riveting set and set them only about halfway, and we're going to do this to about every 10th rivet. The purpose of all of this is to make sure we don't introduce a bend into our trailing edge. Eventually, we get all of the rivets set about halfway. We can then remove the riveter's tape, and then using our flush set, continue driving the rivets, this time from the other side of the rudder. We are effectively creating double flush rivets. The shop head end of the rivet is actually filling the dimple on the opposite side. Both sides of a single rivet end up being flush within the dimple. This is a unique procedure
just for the trailing edge. Installation of the pre-molded fiberglass tip is rather straightforward. The corner at the rear does need a little bit of trimming to make room for the trailing edge, but otherwise it can be easily inserted into the top. We will drill through the pre-drilled holes in the top skin and into the fiberglass flange. After all of the holes are drilled, we remove the tip and deburr the holes. We also need to dimple. While we cannot dimple the fiberglass tip, we can countersink, and this can easily be done using our deburring tool. And after removing some material, we check with a rivet to make sure we've removed about the right amount. And we will be using our pop rivet gun, installing blind rivets, which will fit nicely into the dimple. This effectively completes the assembly of our RV rudder. There is a molded fiberglass rudder bottom piece which attaches pretty much the same way the rudder tip installed. However, the instructions ask us to defer installing this until the rudder is mounted onto the aircraft.
Now that we've completed the rudder, what should your next step be? Well, I recommend you try the Vans Practice Kit. You can order this for a nominal charge directly from Vans. Let's take a look at it. I am holding a partially completed practice kit. This is a sample of a control surface of an aircraft. This could be your rudder, a section of wing. We have a skin, spars, ribs, stiffeners, all of the components that we looked at during the build of our rudder. You get to practice building this. We have flush rivets to set, universal rivets to set, dimpling of the ribs and skin, the ability to create that curled leading edge, as well as the components for the trailing edge. By practicing with the practice kit, you will gain the confidence and skills necessary to do a wonderful job on your rudder and the other components of an RV aircraft. From those of us at Home Built Help, we wish you the best in your RV building projects.